All right. I like this topic. Sometimes it's a little bit technical, sometimes not. I like to use analogies. Let's see what we can do. I think the principal point that we can make to begin is to try to explain how the Neuro VIZR experience can be better understood as an experience of brain engagement and compare that to brain entrainment. Brain engagement is a new term. It's our term. It's the Neuro VIZR term for the nature, the expectation, the design of the experience. It's brain engagement. It's a new term. Brain entrainment, frankly, is pretty well known by a good number of people. A little bit of history, and I'm not going to bore you with it, but there is a fascination, that there's a history to this. It's not as though it just happened 2 years ago or 5 years ago. It's a kind of a charming experience because it involves the nature of the brain, and we're discovering things about the brain. There's a fellow, now passed, Hans Berger. He was a German psychiatrist, actually, who fought in World War I. He had an experience that he thought was a fact of psychic communication, mind-to-mind communication during the war. He came back after the war and began to work in a university. Secretly, he would go down in a lab he had set up and was trying to find evidence, neurological evidence of mind-to-mind communication. He failed. However, as in many cases in science, he bumped into something. He was trying to see if there were signals coming out of the brain, because that's how he thought that they traveled, like early, Morse code or telegraph, or maybe, radio wasn't there yet, because this is quite early. This is 1924. He's down in his lab, he's got these things on the head, and whoa, some kind of electricity comes out. He thought he was onto something. Well, he was, and it's a famous discovery. However, it didn't do well for mind-to-mind psychic communication. But what he found was that there's actually electricity coming out of the head, the brain. He was able to measure it, and he found out that it was pulsing at a rather regular rate of 10 hertz. Well, he didn't know what it was, but since it's the first thing that he discovered, he said, using alpha from the Greek, he called it alpha waves, because it's the first one in the alphabet. That's all, right? And yeah, certainly short after, it was the realization that, wow, when you close your eyes, there's a whole lot more alpha. When you open your eyes, there's a whole lot more of another one. It's faster. What comes after alpha? Beta. So he called those beta waves. And he said, beta waves, when you open your eyes, that's an alpha blockade. So this is the beginning of an appreciation that there is actually electric phenomena in the brain. It can be measured, it has rhythm, it has frequencies, and it wasn't long after, actually there was a convention in the 60s when neurophysiologists said, listen, let's decide what the boundaries are. And now we have our famous delta, theta, alpha, beta. Now gamma, gamma is the new hot number. And of course, on the other end, the epsilon, it keeps on going and going and going. It's important to understand that these measurements are coming from the superficial areas of the brain, the cortex. There's a whole lot of electric activity going on deep in the mid and the low brain, but it's extremely difficult to measure. This has led to the principle of what we called first, the frequency following response. Frequency following response. Actually, there were some folks that bumped into it in the 1930s, but it was pretty much disregarded. They were using sound, and it wasn't amazing until around the late 1960s that people paid attention to it again. And they thought, wow, what is this frequency following response? And there's this other amazing area in physics called complex systems theory that had this term entrainment. They said, that's a good word. Let's borrow that from complex systems theory, and because frequency following response, kind of hard to say, this is brain entrainment. So brain entrainment came out of this extraordinary attempt to validate psychic communication and got birthed by a mistake, and that's Hans Berger. Okay. You got to understand there's this topic that we're streaming right now, and that there's this other one over here called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is a cardinal factor in the Neuro VIZR experience. Neuroplasticity is several hierarchies above importance as compared to brain entrainment. I'm not saying brain entrainment is a bad thing. It's not. It's an excellent thing, and we're going to try to frame it accordingly. But neuroplasticity. So, okay, another name, another date, a Canadian. I'm Canadian born. Yeah. That there's this fellow, Donald Hebb. He's a physiologist, and he came up with a discovery that in the brain's neurology, that actions in the brain, functions in the brain that are repeated with attention tend to then manifest physically as new nerve patterns. And he coined the term fire it to wire it. Fire it to wire it. And at that point, this is 1949, also, I won't say it, but why not? I was born that year, so I think it's great. 1949, he logged this academically, scientifically, and it was termed Hebbian learning. So we've got these two things. We've got this frequency following electric brain thing going on, and we also have, a couple of decades later, this thing of, well, wait a minute, what about the brain? It doesn't seem to be static. You know, Hebb didn't really get much glory because up until just a short while ago, maybe 10-ish, 15 maximum years ago, medical academia, medical education had to change their idea that the brain in adulthood was essentially static. No, it's plastic. Plastic doesn't mean it's filled with, like, recycled bottles or something. Plastic means that you can change it into a new form. Plastic surgery. It's not because you put plastic in your face. The Greek term there, static, elastic, plastic. Elastic means start at A, go to B, let it go, boom, it goes back to A. Plastic means start with A, go to B, let go, oh, actually it doesn't go all the way back, it's changed. So what we've got right now is we have these two parallel brain things developing in our understanding. Frequency following response, AKA brain entrainment, and neuroplasticity, fire it to wire it. The Neuro VIZR experience says, oh, we can have these two things begin to relate to each other for a whole new class of experience. Back in a moment.